I'm Dr. W.F. Strong. Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. John Cook.
I can introduce myself.
Okay,
You don't need you to introduce me.
All right, very good.
I'm Dr. John Cook. I'm also a host of Good Books Radio.
Very good, and he had a great radio voice when you said that. I like it. So we have on with us today. Our guest is Nathan Rostron of Bookish.com. Nathan, welcome. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm quite well.
Could you describe for us Bookish.com? How did it come to be? What's its story?
Of course. Bookish started, we went live in February of 2012. It had started a few years before that. A few publishers in New York got together and they wanted to have an alternative place online where readers could gather to discover books. Amazon was basically the only game in town, and publishers, wanted there to be at least be an option for readers to discover books another way. So that was the initial idea, and it was Simon & Schuster, Penguin, and Hachette Book Group, three of the big six publishers, as they're called, which is now the big five publishers because Penguin and Random House have merged. But that's all inside baseball. What Bookish has come to be is it's a multi-purpose book discovery site for readers. So, like Amazon, it is a retail site. People can buy ebooks, they can buy hardcovers or paperbacks, anything or almost anything that's in print with an ISBN you can find on Bookish. But in addition to that, there are a few ways that readers can discover new books. One is through the editorial content. So me and the other editors here at Bookish are always thinking about new ways to write about books in an engaging way. So that can be tied to what's happening in the culture. We just had a piece about the books that you should read to get over your Breaking Bad addiction now that there's no more Breaking Bad.
Yes, it's very sad. Very sad.
Very sad. And it can be tied to a new book that's coming out. Sometimes we'll do exclusive book trailer reveals and cover reveals. So the new Stephen King book that's out now, Dr. Sleep, which is the sequel to The Shining, we were able to have the trailer for that book aired on Bookish for the first time. And then after it was on Bookish, it aired on the CBS series for Under the Dome, which is another Stephen King vehicle.
Yes. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that. Can you get me a free copy of that book?
I'll see what I can do. I think, I definitely had a review copy on my desk, and I can't guarantee it's still there. That was definitely a hot item as soon as it came in the office.
Yes, I'm sure. But I would like to review it. I would like to review it to see if I like Stephen King's work.
Okay, well, I'll put you in contact with the publicist and see what she thinks.
But you can buy books through Bookish.com, right?
You can, yep. So,
and
if we write an
discounts
article about a book, you can buy the book directly from that article. There's a little buy button next to it. So it's a combination of a retail site and a news site where the retail is folded in with the content.
Okay.
So that distinguishes us from, say, Goodreads, where Goodreads is more of a social network for readers, but you have to go elsewhere if you want to buy a book that you discover on Goodreads. And I should say another part of the book discovery that happens on Bookish is through our recommendation engine. We have a recommendation engine that works a little bit like Pandora does for music, where you enter a book and then the engine gives you 4 or more, up to 12 or 16 books that are like that book. And so it's not based on what other people are reading who read the book, but it's based on the themes in the book, the genre of the book, the setting of it. And so you'll get some interesting responses when you put in a book or multiple books to see what comes out.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting.
I like that.
Bill talked me into doing this interview because it's a different kind of interview. I don't usually do data. I usually do books.
Oh my goodness!
But this is an interesting survey, and the first thing I'd like to talk about with regard to the Princeton Survey Research Associates is that they did do a representative sample. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so, how many people are we talking about total?
They surveyed more than 1,000 people.
Okay.
At random.
At random, and it's interesting if it's really at random. The difference in household income and in even political parties and regions of the country and racially, it's actually an incredibly diverse sample.
Mm-hmm. And so I get that it's a representative sample, but for this group, when they were calling during the day asking to speak to the oldest person, 18 years old or over, the people that declared they're not employed was about 41%. Is that where our readers are, in the unemployed?
Oh my gosh! Well, I guess if you're unemployed, you're more likely to answer
read
a survey call. Sure.
Well, the priority for the activities was interesting because they looked at reading books, watching TV, listening to music, and so on. And reading books got a higher medium priority. 70% said it's a higher medium priority to read books. And I thought America was getting less well-read and less articulate and so on, but it doesn't appear to be the case from this survey.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised too, but everyone I talk to loves reading books, and maybe that's just me and who I know. But
you work
really
at Bookish now.
Too, that yeah, exactly. But it's interesting too, like that watching television specifically was a lower priority than reading books for people.
Yeah, so 55% said a higher medium. Only 21% said TV was a high priority. I don't know if they're realizing that it's a book survey or not, just want people to know they don't watch TV as much. The only thing that beat out reading books was listening to music and exercising. So those are two other good things for folks to be doing.
A lot of people now read as they exercise.
Right. If you've got your iPad, you can.
I mean, I see
well,
people.
Depending on what kind of exercise you're doing, I think it might be hard to do it if you were jogging. But maybe not.
Well, I see people at the gym on their treadmills, and they've got their iPad there reading as they walk fast. They usually aren't running while they do this, but people are combining these activities. But one of the things I found surprising is I thought that with the advent of Kindles and things like that you would have a lot of people reading more of 50 Shades of Grey because they could read it with anonymity. And but your survey doesn't show explosion of mommy porn reading.
Well, there is a slight uptick in romance, but the uptick in romance readers on Kindles and iPads and other tablets is not as high as the uptick in readers of science fiction and fantasy, especially, and also mysteries and thrillers. And that was really
let me make sure I understand this. Now, the increase in reading in science fiction is directly the result of e-readers? Or was it already number one on the list before e-readers showed up?
That's a complicated question.
Okay.
Let me see. I think.
Well, give it a shot.
I think the survey determined that among e-reader owners, reading had increased overall, and among those people with increased reading habits, most of them, proportionally a higher percentage, were reading more sci-fi and fantasy, and also mysteries and thrillers, and also romance. But sci-fi fantasy was actually the largest category of increase.
Yeah, I think it's certainly true for Dr. Cook because, before e-readers, he read, a couple of books a year, and now he's up to 4.
That's a month. He's underestimating me. But I did want to say something about e-readers because I really am someone who likes to turn the pages. And I was talking with some other folks who are old-fashioned in that regard. And I don't know how the survey tells us much about this, but who are, do you suppose, the dedicated real book readers as opposed to the e-book readers?
Well, no, I would have to object to the way you phrase the question because, in my view, a book is the text that an author writes. And you either read it on paper, you read it on a screen, you listen to it as an audiobook, but the book is the creation of the author. So if you're talking about real books, I mean, maybe we're talking about books written by real authors. But the survey, as it tells us, the biggest proportion of tablet readers are college grads. They're in families with household incomes of more than $70,000, and they're also younger than 45.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I use the word real books with a little bit of sarcasm there, but because I hate to give up my papyrus. I mean, I really do.
Yeah, he would prefer scrolls, actually. That would be his choice.
But it was also interesting that not that many people listen to audiobooks anymore. And that used to be the way I did it when I had a long commute in the car, but it seems like they're not using audiobooks as much as I would have thought they would.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this survey tells us exactly why that's the case. Maybe it's because, with the increase of e-reading, there's a decrease in audiobooks. I'm not sure. Do you listen to audiobooks less frequently now?
Yes, I have a very short commute now. So
Yeah.
But it was also unfortunate that I had a tape player, and that's how audiobooks used to come. And of course, tapes are passé as well as papyrus. So I'm really in the past. It was interesting.
I guess you just have to get a new car to go with your new.
I guess I will.
Well, now for me, I read a lot more because of an e-reader. I got my first Kindle in the first form, where it looked really quite like a tablet, and I probably have at least quadrupled my reading because I find it handier. I can, just like the people in the survey, I can take 40 books with me on vacation, and as opposed to bringing a suitcase along of books, which very few people did that. So just the
here's a question
handiness.
For you two, as readers of different types. What's the average amount of time after you finish a book before you start the next one?
Oh, I have 3 or 4 going at the same time.
Right.
And that's his ADD. I like to finish a book, do the interview, and then start the next book whenever possible. So it's a week-to-week show. And that's something interesting about the folks that are in book clubs, although it's only about 7% are in a book reading club. But they were asked, do you read the entire book your group will be discussing? And 74% said always or most of the time. We have as our principle that if we're going to do an interview, we need to read the book in its entirety so that we can have an effective interview. And I'm told by some book authors that not all that many book interview shows the interviewer does that, but we feel like it's important to complete the book because there's things in it that the way we go about asking about the book is just more open-ended that way.
Definitely. Well, I think you'd have to separate, book clubs from professional interviewers. But sometimes, maybe in that proportion of book clubs where readers aren't finishing the book, maybe the wine is more the focus on the conversation. But hopefully, you guys are keeping the wine to a minimum.
Well, I am. Cook's a Scotchman, so.
I wish that were true. One of the surprises to me about the kinds of books people read is the low percentage of religious books, 5% of those surveyed. I thought with the Left Behind series and some of the other things that were coming out about interdisciplinary religion that it would be higher. But sci-fi and mystery and romance seem to have religion beat on this survey anyway.
Well, I think it probably depends on how you classify books as religious, because you have the book like Heaven is Real. Is that considered a religious book? It comes under nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah, and you'd probably find it in the biographies and memoirs section of the bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the future of the trends in publishing? Science fiction is dominant here, so is therefore science fiction stronger than ever and being pushed by a movie industry that's hot on science fiction?
Right, that's a good point. I think what you're going to see going forward is more of a folding in of popular culture and book culture. It's with more e-reading, with more people, engaged in social networks and talking about books. on fan sites, on either Facebook or specific fan sites to a book, like they do with movies. I think publishers are going to try to figure out ways to, meet that hunger and that conversation. So it's interesting with, that those genre books are where the biggest increase is. But, I think those genres, I think there's a couple of things to say. One is that those genres have the most active online conversations happening. Like there are rabid fan sites, there are places like Reddit where you can go and you can meet and talk with a community of people online who've just read the same book you have. Mm-hmm. And you see that less with other genres, maybe with literary fiction, or maybe it's not happening as much with religious books, I'm not sure. And then the other thing is just the style of book, I asked you how long you go between finishing a book and starting the next book, because I've found with my e-reader, if I'm reading a thriller series, mm-hmm. Let's say I read a Lee Child book. I finish the book on my iPad.
I've read all the Lee Child.
And then a button comes up and says, do you want to download the next one?
Yes.
And I say, okay, I will, So it's part of that sort of addictive style of storytelling, I think, that really appeals to, immediate, satisfaction.
Well, I'm so glad you used that as an example, because that was my first experience with an e-reader. Was my first addictive response to an e-reader was with Lee Child, the Reacher series, where I read like 14 in one summer, and it's the immediacy. You don't have to wait to go to the library. You don't have to go to the bookstore and forget that you have that in mind. You can download it at 11 p.m. and get going again. It's wonderful.
It's interesting, too, that ties into one of the factors that they asked about, what factors might create interest in a particular book. And the major factor that was cited most powerfully was the opinions of a relative or friend and your opinion of the writer's previous work, which ties into what y'all were talking about. It's kind of counterintuitive to the book Marketeers that opinions by professional reviewers, the cover of the book, the non-professionals read on the internet, and the opinions of other writers don't affect people nearly as much in terms of it being a major factor in selecting a particular book.
Right. Yeah, we tend to, we want the authors we know, and we want the authors recommended by people we know and trust.
Now, Nathan, since you work with authors a bit, have they shifted themselves? Because authors used to spend a lot of time trying to create a beautiful book. I mean, a physically beautiful book. Do they have less concern about that now?
Oh, not at all. I mean, I think a book cover. I mean, the art departments at publishing houses whose entire concern is book design are not going anywhere. I think a very appealing book cover will always be important, especially online, because we find that even in our articles, like, we're trying to add more visual elements because their eye is drawn to read when it's attached to an enticing image. But as far as authors go and a shift in focus, I mean, you definitely, I used to work at a publisher, actually, at Little Brown & Company, and we were always desperate to try to get the authors to engage more online, to have active social networks, be active on Facebook, do interviews on Goodreads, have a Twitter account. And it's interesting as far as our content goes, like the articles that we've written that have sort of taken off on Twitter or Facebook end up being the more successful pieces. And it's just a way of, again, it's that kind of like intense fan base that you can find in online spaces to get people, you don't have to be in the room with someone who's read a book. They can just say, you have to read this book by this author.
Well, is it easier now in this e-reading world for an anonymous author, I mean, just an average person who writes well, to get something published? Now, I'm not talking about Amazon self-publishing. I'm talking about to actually go through a publisher like one of yours and to get published. Is it easier now because of the digital world?
No. I think it's still pretty hard. I'm I don't know if you call it optimism or pessimism, but I always go back to, you got to have a great book. I mean, it always comes down to the quality of the book. But that said, you have to get the attention of the right people for it, whether you're getting the attention of an agent who already has the attention of the publishers,
right,
or, if you go with a lesser-known agent, then, you've got a little bit more of an uphill battle. So many, it's amazing how many books are written every year and how few of them are actually getting published, even self-published. I mean, I would say it's probably, it's definitely less than 5% of all the books that are written are getting published. And, right now, at least, who knows with the future and more self-publishing, but right now, editors at publishing houses tend to be the tastemakers who are choosing, I'm going to publish this book and not these 5 other books.
So something like 50 Shades of Grey is just an absolute outlier. It breaks all the rules, and it's an exception.
But, that goes back to rabid fandom. That book was born out of Twilight fan fiction.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly. And I think she found readers, she self-published first. Publishers only noticed her because she had already sold millions of copies on her own. Mm-hmm. But her audience was built in. It was that rabid Twilight fan base.
And all of them complained that it was horribly written, but they kept reading.
Don't you hate that when you have to keep reading, even if you don't like how it's written?
Well, I don't know. I haven't read it myself. I think Cook's read the whole trilogy.
I have not, but thank you for...
How many times?
I actually have not read that, although I get credit for one of my more lurid interviews a lot. We have a lot of hits on that particular MP3. It's interesting when people read as well. I used to read a lot in bed, and I don't anymore. I think it's because I use a pen, and I kept having the pen leak on the sheets at night, so I quit reading in bed. But of course, if I had that electronic book, it might be different. But during leisure time seems to be a preferred time to read as opposed to on vacation. Which surprised me a little bit. I think that sometimes, I guess if you're on vacation, you're sharing time with others, but...
maybe people are taking fewer vacations.
Well, they used to talk about the beach read, that people would, every summer would have the great beach read, and I think for a while people were afraid to take their iPads to the beach for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And you couldn't read in the sun.
There
used to be a problem with that, but that may have reduced somewhat of the people taking it. But if you get on a plane, my God, everybody pops out their tablets and e-readers as soon as they can. Mm-hmm. So they're very common.
Yeah, and I'm in New York, so I commute on the subway, and I would say easily on a lot of my commutes, more than half the people are reading. Whether a lot of them are still reading, physical books.
Now your survey doesn't talk about this, but what about newspapers? Is there an increased readership of newspapers digitally?
Oh, I'm sure, absolutely. I mean, I think that's why the New York Times is still alive.
Yeah, I think
they have such a strong digital subscriber base. And it's interesting. I mean, I'm a person, probably an outlier here, but I'm a subscriber to the print edition of the Times.
Oh, you are strange.
But I read it mostly on my iPad because it's a free. If you're already a subscriber to the print, they give you the digital.
Oh, I see. Because I have the digital
same
subscription.
With New Yorker.
I have the digital subscription to the New York Times, the Sunday edition. I used to go buy it here locally. It was $5 to go get the physical, the huge 5-pound edition of the New York Times.
Right.
And now I get it delivered to my digital doorstep at 6 a.m. every Sunday morning for 99 cents. And so it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And you can get any newspaper like that. Well, not any, but you can get many. You can get, all sorts of Asian papers and kind of small papers. I can get the Abilene Reporter News on the on the Kindle for 99 cents on Sunday.
There was a reversal in the Princeton Survey Research Associates of the way you usually think of it. They asked if you ever watched a movie or a television adaptation of the book that caused you to read the book. And usually I think we think of it the other way around. You read the book and you say, I got to see the movie, and you're usually disappointed in the movie or adaptation because it doesn't deal with the whole book as richly as the book does. But interesting that over half, 56%, said sometimes they'll watch a movie and that makes them want to go get the book.
Yeah, and I felt that too. I mean, it's interesting. One of my book recommendations that I give a lot is this book Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell.
Yes.
And I don't know if you guys saw the movie, but the movie it's really visually arresting and totally incomprehensible.
That's
even
how I
to
felt.
me, I've read the books, but I've talked to people who have seen the movie and they're so interested in it, but they didn't quite get it, and then they want to go and read the book now so they can have like sort of the fuller experience.
Mm-hmm. I think there is some of that. I know that I was thinking about if I had been surveyed on this, I'd have to say, yes, I read a book after the movie, and I was so disappointed because the book didn't end happy and the movie did. So, that was the natural, because Robert Redford's version of that was like a psychodrama with him winning at the end. And, of course, in the book, he strikes out and falls in ignominious shame, which is not how they ended the natural. But mostly when you get the book after the adaptation, you get more, I think. There's just something about reading that you can't get from film.
Well, reading the book has always been, for me, more likely to drive me to see the movie, because I'm just curious as how they're going to try to pull that off and how they're going to tell the story or compress it or whatever. It drives me. In one case, I've been driven the other way. Game of Thrones, I watched on TV, and it pushed me to the books because I wanted to know what happened next. I couldn't wait for 9 months to know where this was headed, so it drove me to the books. But that's pretty rare, generally.
And what do you think of the books versus the show?
Oh, I love the books. I think the books are marvelous. But Game of Thrones is where justice goes to die, so it just completely keeps you demoralized and depressed the whole time. All the good people, end badly, and the bad people live forever. It's kind of sad.
Yeah. And I too think that the usual path is from the book to the movie or TV adaptation more often than not. I think we pick up the book first, and usually it's out first, so that helps a lot.
So what are the big events in publishing in this next year? What great books are coming out?
Oh my gosh! Well, there's so many great books coming out this fall. The book that I am reading now, I'm reading in Galley, that I'm most excited about is the new book by Donna Tartt, who wrote The Secret History in the early 90s, and then about 12 years ago wrote a book called The Little Friend. Mm-hmm. And so she's one of my favorite writers, but she only writes a book every 10 or 12 years. And finally, she's written this book called The Goldfinch. And it is sort of, it's set in New York and in the international art world. And it's about this guy who, after a childhood tragedy, he sort of, without really realizing it, he gets swept away by the sort of the international art thievery ring. And she's just such a fantastic writer. I really love it.
We will look forward to that.
Either of you, I'm sorry?
I said we will look forward to that.
Yes, absolutely. It comes out later this month. And then I don't know if either of you read Gary Steinhardt's book, Super Sad True Love Story. He's a very funny writer. He's a satirist, and his memoir is coming out. It's called Little Failure, and that sort of gives you an insight into his sort of self-deprecating humor. But that'll come out in January. I'm pretty excited about that.
Now, these results of the survey, had they been published yet? And if so, where can our listeners see the results of the survey?
Yes, go to your local newsstand and pick up a USA Today, or go to usatoday.com.
Okay. And
there's a story by Bob Minzenheimer. I'm probably getting Bob's name wrong. Bob Minzesheimer,
yes.
In USA Today. It was published today.
Okay. We've been talking with Nathan Rostron. Unfortunately, we're about out of time. I would like to remind our listeners that if you don't hear our 4 broadcasts during the week, on Thursdays at 12:30 and 7, and on Sundays at 6:30 a.m. and 3 p.m., you can also find us online on Facebook at Good Books Radio, and on the website goodbooksradio.com. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook, along with my co-host,
Dr. W.F. Strong.
Thanks for listening.